Before the next episode of X Job Downloaded starts, I have a big favour to ask. If you've enjoyed any of our episodes so far, please can you click on the follow button on your platform. I'm on Apple, Spotify, Google, Amazon and YouTube. It costs nothing to follow, but makes a real difference to me as a podcast producer. Thank you. This interview is being tape recorded. My name is Paul Maleary and this is X Job Downloaded, and today I'm going to interview Paul Rees. Now, Paul is a former member of the British Army, RUC, and is now a published author. Good morning.
Good morning, Paul.
Thanks so much for taking part in this today. Where are you in the world at the moment?
I'm just outside Carnarvon in northwest Wales.
Oh, lovely. Well, there will be no investiture there this year, apparently. Unlike the one we witnessed when we were a lot younger.
1969 it was, yes.
I remember my mum, I think we all got the day off school. I mean, I was at school. No disrespect, I don't think you were then, but I
was 15 at the time.
15. Oh, well, there you were. And I remember watching that, and there was a very young Prince of Wales, Prince Charles, going through the investiture at Carnarvon Castle. So, where did it all begin?
Right. Well, I was 15 when Northern Ireland kicked off. I was at boarding school and about to leave, and I was about 5'4", weighed 7 stone, dripping wet. And the careers officer asked me what I was going to do when I left school, and I told him I was going to join the British Army. What? When he finished laughing, he told me I wouldn't last 2 weeks. I had to wait till I was 17. I made myself a promise that because it was kicking off in Northern Ireland, if it was still going on when I joined, I was going to go there.
Wow.
I joined up in March 1971 in the Royal Corp of Transport, the fittest alcoholics in the British Army. And I did my basic training. I was then posted to London as a staff car driver, driving senior officers. In 73, I was driving the Chief of Staff London District when my posting to Lisbon, Northern Ireland came through. He offered to get me out of it, and we had a disagreement over that. And I arrived in Lisbon in Northern Ireland, where I stayed until the end of 1978. I was a driver to a senior officer, the brigade commander. And when his 2 years finished, another one came along who asked me to stay on for a further 2 years. I did. And then another one came along and asked me to see out my time in Northern Ireland. So I did. And when I was leaving the army, my then wife said to me, I'm rather fed up with you being in the army in Northern Ireland. So I joined the police in Northern Ireland. You just can't please some people. I did my basic training and was posted to Lisbon, which they classed as Slipper City, because it was the easiest of all the stations to get posted to.
Right.
After 3 years, she decided that we had to leave Northern Ireland. Either she'd go on her own with my son or I came with her. So I returned to the mainland.
Right.
I was rather glad, actually, because I had realised by then that I wasn't a very good policeman.
I'm sure that's not the case.
Sadly, listen, I'm honest, it's true. I wasn't a very good policeman.
Well, we'll come on to that. So you're born in Coventry.
Yes.
How did you end up in a boarding school?
I passed my 11 plus, and I have a brother 10 years my senior who had attended King Henry VIII School in Coventry. And he was the great sportsman, the great academic. When I went for my interview to go there, I saw his name everywhere for cricket, rugby, swimming. And I decided I didn't want to go there because I didn't want to follow in my brother's footsteps.
No.
And so I failed the entrance exam. And the head teacher told me either I didn't want to go there or I was stupid. And I said, well, it's a combination of both, to be honest. And so we went home and my mother said, right, that's it. I'll find you a school. And she found me a boarding school.
Wow. And how old were you then? So you'd done your 11 plus.
11.
You were 11. Wow.
Yeah. I stayed there till I was 16. I passed several GCSEs and decided I'm going to join the army. That's me. I'm gone.
And what school was it that you went to?
It was the City of Coventry boarding school near Clearbury Mortimer, Kidderminster.
Is it still going?
No, it's now a Christian retreat.
Oh, okay.
I went back there last year with my son and met up with one of my old masters. And my son said to him, I can't believe my dad, he still calls you sir after all these years.
Old habits, mate. You can't shift them, can you? That's the thing.
No, you can't. No. I mean, they were great teachers. We had a couple of bad ones, but by and large, they were great teachers and they taught me a lot.
Absolutely, and it's the moulding for the rest of our lives, isn't it? I mean, I was talking some the other day about role models and what have you, and I think that's what's missing in so much of society now. We don't have true role models. We have, and I'm not religious as such, but we have false idols, and we don't have true role models, which is a real shame.
Don't have enough discipline either.
No, we don't, and you know we've softened. So take me back to 1971, Royal Corp of Transport. So you're driving around in Bedford trucks and all sorts of things. Where did you do your basic training?
In Aldershot, in Buller Barracks, which is no longer, sadly.
Right. And, I mean, you're talking about a time where we're only 26 years after the end of the Second World War.
Yeah.
So were there still people serving that had served during the war, or I suppose they were just coming to the end of their service?
Yeah, there was a guy, I think his name was Alfie Betts, who was coming to the end of his 28 years, I think it was, and he had joined up towards the end of World War II in the Royal Army Service Corps. And he came to Buller Barracks and was talking to us. And then he came to Regents Park in London, where I was stationed after that.
Oh, okay.
And he was a cracking fella, and he had seen everything, done everything. He got the scars and the videos to prove it.
Excellent. Yeah, and we forget about that generation sometimes, don't we? I mean, it's we stand at the Remembrance Day parades and all very proud, but we forget that, you know, what some people actually did go through.
Yeah.
So Buller Barracks, and then we get posted to. You've done 2 years at Regents Park. What was that like, coming to the bright lights of London?
That was amazing. Yeah, we did a 3-week staff car driving course. And at the end of it, you had to drive around London, and the car had a pint glass of water on the bonnet. And if you spilt more than 1 inch, you failed the course.
Really? How bizarre was that? Yeah, I bet. And what were you driving?
Austin 1800s, and then I drove a Vauxhall Ventura.
And were they the standard staff cars at the time, or was that's just something that
Austin 1800s were. The Vauxhall Ventura was a new introduction to the army, and I drove the Chief of Staff London District, and I drove Brigadier O'Cock, received in the post a parcel bomb, which I went to his house and I handed him his mail.
Oh.
He went upstairs and ripped it open with his thumb, and it blew his thumb and his index finger off.
Wow.
After that, I drove in civvies, and I had a different civilian car every day.
Wow. So this is an IRA. This was an IRA tactic, wasn't it, in the 70s?
It was, yeah.
So the post would have gone into the mailroom at the barracks, and then you'd have picked it up.
No, it went to his home.
Oh, it actually went directly to his house?
Yeah, they knew his home address.
Wow. He was a very, very lucky man. I mean, were you still there when it exploded?
Yes.
Crikey.
I thought his cooker had blown up, and I went running upstairs, and there he is holding his hand. So called for an ambulance straight away. The military police arrived probably 10 minutes later and took over.
Wow. That's a bit of an eye-opener, isn't it? I mean, you're still a very young man, and you think you're relatively safe, although, as I say, the IRA were in full flight at that time and causing no end of problems.
Yeah, I was 18. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a bit of a welcome to the British Army type of thing, because you expect it on a battlefield, but you don't expect it round the CO's home.
No.
So you're at Regents Park Barracks, and what was that like in those days?
It was great. I mean, we had rooms above the old stables, and we used to park the staff cars underneath. And we had a little naffy in the corner. But mostly we went out on the town at night time.
But so
the same barracks is where the SAS trained to storm the Iranian Embassy in '82.
When you moved away from London, you go to Northern Ireland. How did you find that transition?
Difficult to start off with. I was in Seatful Barracks in Lisbon, which was massive. And it was a culture shock getting off the ferry, being met by the movements guy, who was a Lance Corporal, being shepherded into a white coach with no writing on it, but knowing that everybody knew who was in that coach. And the Lance Corporal movements guy was the only one who was armed, and he had a Browning 9mm pistol and a civvy jacket over his uniform. So it was quite strange.
Yeah, it's a bit unnerving because, I mean, as I say, we're looking at a really aggressive time in the history of Northern Ireland. So how many people would have been on this bus, on this coach?
I think there were about 20 of us, and we were all getting off in Lisbon.
Wow. And I know you said it's called Slipper Central or whatever term you use, but nevertheless... Slipper City, but it still saw a number of attacks and explosions over the course of time.
Yeah, there were a couple of bombs smuggled in, which killed a couple of people after I'd gone. They missed me again. And yeah, we had a few incidents there, but driving a brigade commander was an experience in itself because his name was Richard Gerard Wright. And I write about him in my book, A Humding of Heroes. And there are two types of officers. There are boots officers and there are shoes officers. Shoes officers are staff officers. They never get out from behind their desk and they probably couldn't read a map. Boots officers, which Dickie Gerard Wright was a guy, he was down in amongst his troops and he looked after them and they worshipped him for it. And to be honest with you, on his crew, we would have died for him. He was a fantastic fella.
And what was his background?
Royal Anglians. And he'd been in Northern Ireland on various tours and was known by both sides. And in fact, when he left, he had letters from both sides congratulating him on his ability to see the various perspectives from both sides and not to be partial. He was totally impartial.
That's commendable because there was a lot of vitriol around the British Army and the things that took place as we continued to read unfairly, I would say.
Yes, yeah.
But yeah, they're interesting people, and as I say, they come from those sorts of commanding officers come from a different lifestyle, different background. When you arrive in Northern Ireland, as I say, we're in full flow with the IRA and what have you. What was it like living in? Did you live in barracks or were you out?
I lived in barracks to start off with.
And what was that like?
Different. Yeah, there were so many of us there. There were different units. We had the Royal Pioneer Corps, we had the Royal Signals, we had the Military Police, we had the Intelligence Corps, which is not very aptly named, to be honest. Yeah, we had a variety of different groups, organisations, units. NITAT was there at one stage, Northern Ireland Tactical Advice Team. Yeah, it was different.
But the whole place, I assume, was bolted down. You weren't, you didn't have people on camp, and you didn't go out socialising.
Oh, we did. Yes, in Lisbon, we went out. Quite often, there was one particular bar called Corkins, which there were two levels. The locals used the ground floor, and squaddies used the upstairs.
Oh, really?
Because Lisbon is predominantly Protestant.
Right.
It was classed as a safer environment.
Wow, I didn't think that. I just assumed, I mean, assumption is something we shouldn't do, but I just assumed that you were going to be bolted down and never going out to meet the public.
No, that was the units in Belfast who arrived for a 4-month tour, and they were bolted down. But in Lisbon, we had a great deal of freedom.
Wow, that is interesting. What was it like actually in the camp though? The atmosphere in the camp.
It was like a typical squaddy camp. There were punch-ups between various units, but by and large, we had discos I think it was Wednesday and Sunday, which we used to call the Grabber Granny Night. There were bingo sessions, football matches, self-defense classes, your typical squaddy camp.
Yeah, I mean, my dad was in the army, as I've said before in other podcasts, so we grew up in Colchester, so... so he was a military policeman. Don't hold that against me. But
no, I can tell you a true story about military police. I've got a lot of respect for them. But I was driving the Brigadier to Aldergrove Airport, and we drove past a MP Land Rover, and the Lance Corporal was at the side tugging the front offside wheel. And the Brigadier said, "Corporal, for God's sake, get out and help him." So I went back and said, "What's the problem, mate?" And he went, "Well, I got a puncture, can't you see?" I said, "Well, what are you trying to do?" "Well, I'm trying to get the bloody wheel off." He said, "I've got the nuts off." I went, "Great, now try jacking it up." And that is a true story. And I walked away and the Brigadier went, "Oh, my God. No wonder they're the monkeys."
Oh, brilliant. And was that over there? That was in Northern Ireland?
Yes, at Aldergrove Airport, which is now Belfast International Airport.
Oh, I see. Oh, is that what it transformed into?
Yeah.
How did your family feel about you being in Northern Ireland? What was you were a youngster and there's things they're reading in the newspapers.
Well, my father had died when I was 13. My mother hated the fact that I joined up in the first place and was not happy when I went to Northern Ireland. But my brother, being 10 years my senior, he was an RAF police sergeant, Snowdrop. I still don't talk to him. So she was okay. Well, you'll get posted to Germany. And I said, "No, I'm going to Lisbon." "What, in Portugal?" I said, "No, Northern Ireland." And she wasn't happy at all.
No.
But...
And we saw this week that, the IRA are still active with the shooting of the PSNI chief inspector. I always want to call them the RUC. I'm sorry, but that's that is what I was brought up on. And so the threat is still out there. Can you just explain what the protocols were around checking cars and what have you? Because there'll be people listening to this who have got no idea what you would have gone through out there with your own personal life and what you would have done.
On a typical vehicle checkpoint, I don't know from the working units, as I call them, the ones that came over for 4 months, like the Royal Artillery, the Paras, the Marines. But when we did it, you stop a car, one would go to the driver, the other 3 would be covering the bases, the area around you. You check his license, and if he's a known person, you then get him out, and he adopts the position against the car. You frisk him, search him, then you search the car, and then if all's clear, you let them go. But always, we did anyway, always with a sense of politeness. Even if a guy was like Jerry Adams, you would still treat him with politeness because you knew one wrong word and they'd be jumping on you.
Yeah, absolutely.
You'd have the press all over you. You'd have the MPs looking all over you. So you played it cool. And when I hear about when people say, "Oh, that patrol stopped me and they abused me," sometimes it happened because the guys were frustrated. They were fighting an enemy they couldn't see.
Yeah.
So they got frustrated, and it's understandable.
And behaviour breeds behaviour, doesn't it? Because if you stop somebody and they're polite and you're polite back, and I get this, stop and search with the police, it's always, the police are the oppressors. But actually, when you look at yes, there are people that are bad, make no mistake, and I wouldn't tolerate it. But actually, when they're stopping some of these kids, and the kids are straight up in their faces, and they wonder why there's animosity and aggravation at the end of it.
Yeah.
Did you ever get to meet any of the, or get to see any of the notable members of the paramilitary?
The one I remember most is once I'd left the army, I had 3 months before I could join the RUC. And I got myself a job as a van salesman selling crisps. And they were called Sam Spuds, Mrs. McGreedy's Crisps. And the sales manager, Ronnie McMorrow, said, right, off you go. There's a van, 480 boxes, go and sell them. No training, nothing, just off you go. So I went out and I came back at about 2:00 in the afternoon and he said, you're not quitting, are you? I said, no, I've sold out. And he couldn't believe it. He checked the back of the van. He went, okay. So he loaded me up again and said, right, can you do Belfast tomorrow? So the next day I drove into Belfast and I saw a club and went in. And in those days I had a thick beard, long hair. And I thought, I'm going to put my Irish accent on here. So I started talking in my wee Irish accent, there. What about you guys, And I got chatting to a guy and he said, did you play pool? I said, I do. He said, come on, we'll have a wee game. So he beat me and they bought 48 boxes of crisps off me. And as I was going out, a guy said to me, do you know who just beat you at pool there? I said, no. And he told me the guy's name. I won't say the name. He was the IRA brigade commander for Belfast. And he said, you're lucky. If you'd beaten him at pool, you wouldn't be walking out now.
Really?
So, yeah, and I probably stopped a few people, probably not knowing them, to be honest.
Yeah. Yeah, because like you say, they were the unknown enemy. Because everybody looked exactly the same and, they all had the same accent. There's no distinguishing marks. And I mentioned it in a previous podcast. I went out and played hockey against the RUC, and we went down the Protestant side and the Catholic side. And the murals are absolutely amazing. I mean, the work that they are works of art, irrespective of what side you follow. But I vividly remember having bricks thrown at the armoured Land Rover that I was in by a load of 6 and 7, 8-year-olds that are just standing there and doing their stuff.
Well, my first patrol in Belfast, in the city centre, I hunkered down into a doorway and a little boy of about 4 came across to me and I went, "You all right, mate?" And his actual words were, "Fuck off, you British bastard." And his mother came across and said, "Welcome to Belfast."
Yeah.
And walked off. And that was a shock to see a kid of that age giving me that level of abuse.
It's a real shame, isn't it? Because it's a beautiful country and it's spoilt by a handful of people. On both sides, dare I say it. I mean, there are, whatever side they've got. It's organised criminality. It's nothing to do with religion now. It's all organised criminality.
It's tribal. That's all it is. I mean, these people go on holiday to Benidorm or wherever, and they mingle and they have a holiday together, and no problems. They get back home, they start throwing bricks and God knows what at each other.
Yeah, terrible shame. Terrible shame. So, was your wife from that area?
No, she was from Sunderland, and we met. She was in the double RAC.
Oh, okay.
Royal Armoured Corps. Royal Armoured Corps. Thinking back to what she looked like. And we met over the phone. She was in Taunton and I was in Lisbon, and we arranged to meet up. So I came home on R&R and met up, and a year later we got married and she moved out. We got a married quarter, but within the camp itself, we were lucky.
She was a Mackem as well.
She was a Mackem, yes. She hated me calling her that.
So, for the listeners, and I know the stories here, but army quarters, what are army married quarters like?
In those days, they were brilliant. I have to admit, you march in and the civvy guy there you have to check it all over, lampshades, if it's clean, and it has to be spotless. And they were amazing. It was a 3-bedroom semi we were in, and there was a massive green outside where we could kick a ball around. And yeah, they were amazing. I'm told these days they're horrendous. But in those days, we had to look after them.
Yes.
And if you got fined.
You did, because when you got marched out, if it wasn't as spick and span as when you went in, you'd be in all sorts of problems.
Exactly. Yeah.
Again, but then the army have sold off a lot of military homes and whatever. It's a real shame. How long were you then after getting married? How long were you in Northern Ireland?
I got married when did I get married? Hang on. 76. So I was in the army for 2 years with her, and then 2.5 years in the RUC with her. We rented a house in Lisbon on the Ballinhinch Road. And we were adopted by an ex-Navy war dog called Blackie. And he was absolutely amazing.
Really?
Yeah, he was a beauty. He would have died to protect us.
Wow.
Fantastic dog. He died of leukemia in 83.
Bloody hell.
It's a great shame.
How did you end up adopting the dog?
We saw an advert in Visor magazine, which is the Northern Ireland military magazine, looking for someone to adopt this dog. And so I contacted this guy, a chief petty officer, and he brought the dog around and came into the married quarter. And my son, Simon, was about 6 weeks old. He was in his pram in the living room, and Blackie just lay down by the pram. And then Simon started crying, and Blackie sat up, and three of us were about to pounce on him. When he walked out of the room and went upstairs, he came down with Simon's little blue teddy, which I've still got.
Wow.
And he placed it in the pram and then lay down again. And the CPO said, "That dog's yours. That dog loves you."
Wow.
Totally amazing experience.
Wow. And what was it used for in the Navy? I mean, it's a war dog, but I mean, what uses would they have in the Navy?
I actually didn't ask, to be honest.
No.
But I was given a list of words I couldn't say.
Right.
And a list of antidote words. Like I couldn't say attack. So I couldn't say, if I'm watching football, go on, attack, because the dog would probably go for the TV.
Well, I never.
Yeah, and the list of antidote, I can't remember half of them, to be honest. But yeah, he was a big German Shepherd, long hair, and absolutely amazing dog.
Well, I never. Because I mean, they're different to police dogs. They are, the army dogs are different to police dogs. And my dad was a dog handler out in Cyprus, and by the time he got back to the UK, the dog had killed the new kennel handler. Yeah. Yeah, there was a kennel maid, or a chap in Cyprus. This is in the 60s, and the dog was super aggressive and went on and killed somebody. But yeah, it's a great shame. So how did it come about that you joined the RUC?
I'd wanted to join the police, and I went on my pre-release course in Catterick, and I did the entrance exam, the basic one. And they came to me and they said, "Right, you've passed." And there was a pass mark out of 200 for different police forces. The RUC and I think Lancashire, the pass mark was 180. The pass mark for the Metropolitan Police was 70.
Right.
And I got over 180. And I said, well, I'm going to stay in Northern Ireland. I might as well join the RUC. And I came back home, gave my wife the decision, and then went and slept in the barracks for 3 nights while she fumed and ranted and raved.
And where did you go and do your training?
In Belfast at Castlereagh.
And were there many other former military? Because there was quite an attraction to British soldiers.
I think the whole course, because I was a full-time reserve, which meant you've got your part-time reserves who do when they want. Full-time reserves are the same as full-time regular coppers. And I think there were like 15 of us on the course, and probably 12 were ex-military. So
how does that work? So you're full-time reserve, you get paid.
Yeah.
And you're part of the RUC effectively.
Yes.
So why?
And you do exactly the same as the RUC do. You just don't go through God knows how many weeks training in a skilling.
I see. Because you've already got that background. Right. Oh, that makes sense. Yeah, I was wondering how that worked because, as I say, but what about local procedure and the law element?
You learnt that on the job.
Is it still the same?
I don't think so. To be honest, I haven't got a clue.
No.
I don't know if they've got reserves in the PSNI. I'm not sure.
And because we're talking 1978, and we're just going into a completely different style of terrorism, because you're now looking at hunger strikes and so on and so forth. Yeah. What was that like, policing Belfast at that time?
The only time I did Belfast was when we did the District Mobile Support Unit. Right. And you would be called in from Lisbon. There'd be like 6 of us in a Land Rover. You'd be called in when something specific happened, like a raid on an illegal gambling club or something in Belfast, and we'd be there as support. So I didn't really get involved in anything like that. It was basic policing in Lisbon, traffic, sorting out squaddies that are getting drunk in the Chinese restaurants and that sort of thing.
And what was that like, though? What was the atmosphere like, having gone from the military into the police?
It was interesting because the Protestants hated me because I was a policeman. The Catholics hated me because I was an English policeman. Squaddies hated me because I was a policeman. So, it was interesting.
Quite a lonely old place out there.
Yeah, I think that's why the wife, and she also got a bit fed up with being searched every time we went into shops and so on.
Searched by?
The civilian searchers on every store, wherever you went in, you were searched.
Really?
Yeah.
And that's because people were putting bombs into shopping centres and what have you. I saw an interesting picture the other day where a parade of shops, I can't tell you where it was in Northern Ireland, but they literally had cages on the outside of the... Yeah. So that if a bomb did go off, it would prevent the blast from taking all the debris into the streets. Yeah,
and pubs had the same big cages, the anti-shrapnel cages. Yeah, you could tell a pub, you could tell a police station, totally armoured up.
Yeah, because they used to have big, was it Sangers, the big...
Yeah.
And what were they like?
I never went in one.
Didn't you?
I never had to, thank goodness. I was never on guard duty.
Because when I went out there, the place where we went to, the RUC hosted us, and this is a few years ago, and there were still problems out there, but it was fortified. You still had the armed guards at the front and what have you, and we went to Stormont as well, and that was an experience.
Yeah.
So local policing in Lisbon at that time, how did that all work for you?
Not too badly. In my book, A Humbling of Heroes, I cite an incident where I was out with a young WPC. Yesterday is the 38th anniversary of her being murdered by the IRA.
And what was her name?
Rosemary McGookin.
I mean, I can see you're getting upset, and and I can feel your pain, mate. So Rosemary and you worked together?
We did, yeah. And we went to we were sent to a domestic, and she said, right, follow my lead, and knocked on the door. This little woman opened the door and berated us for about 10 minutes. She really abused everybody and everything under the sun, and then announced that her husband was upstairs and he was armed with a knife.
Oh, my life.
So I said to Rosemary, right, stay down here, I'll go and have a word. And I went upstairs, and he's in the bedroom, and he's got this knife and he's waving it around. And he said, have you come to arrest me? I said, hang on, first things first. How long have you been married to that woman downstairs? He said, 20 years. I said, you deserve a medal, mate. She pissed me off after 10 minutes. He started to laugh, and he sat down, and I said, come on, give me the knife. So he gave me the knife, and Rosemary came in. Are we arresting him? I said, no. Have you got somewhere else you can go, mate? He went, yes. I said, right, come on in. And we took him out of the house and drove him home. And he actually came to the station next day and spoke to my inspector and said he was impressed by the way I handled it. He thought he was going to get a kicking, which some of my colleagues would have done had they gone there.
Yeah.
And so it diffused the situation and it sorted everything out. So, yeah, it was that sort of thing, parking tickets, speeding, your normal British Bobby job, really, apart from the fact that you might get shot at any minute.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because I remember dealing with domestics, even on the mainland in the late 80s, was completely different to the way that domestics are dealt with now. And right, it is right because people got seriously hurt and they needed that extra support. But so your colleague Rosemary, you say it was 38 years ago yesterday?
Yeah, 28th of February 1985. She was in Newry Police Station in the porter cabin canteen. A priest had arranged to meet an inspector there. Strangely, he didn't turn up. You can make of that what you will. The IRA sent over 9 mortars and killed 9 RUC officers.
Oh, wow.
Rosemary was one of them. And I was out the RUC by then. I was in a bakery supply company and saw it on the news and thought, I hope she's okay. And then saw her name next day.
That's terrible, mate. Yeah, and there's a lot. I mean, behind you, and this isn't going out on as a video, but behind you, I can see a picture of all your murdered colleagues from the RUC, and it's terrible. It's terrible waste of life, mate, and it's still going on out there, though. I mean, the shooting last week, but things are getting. I don't know whether they're suppressed by the media. I think it's part of the Good Friday Agreement that the media don't report on everything. But yeah, there's still...
Not on the mainland, no. That's what got us over there. Was it would be reported on Ulster TV, but the mainland wouldn't hear about half of it.
Really?
And we always said if K80 turned up, we knew it was bad.
Yeah, because it was daily news when we were kids, when I was a kid. But now we're obviously we're hearing about the Brexit issues and what have you, and Richie going out there trying to schmooze people. What was the motivator? I mean, you've said that your wife had enough, but had you had enough of policing by this time?
I'd realised by then that I was never going to be a successful police officer. I wanted to be in traffic, but I got my police driving card, but I knew that because I was English, I'd never get to that point.
Right.
And the realisation hit me one night in a pub, and I went home and I said to the missus, I think it's time we went home. And we tossed a coin, Sunderland or Coventry. I lost. We went to Sunderland. And, started again, basically.
Mm. And what did starting again look like?
It was hard work. For 3 months, I couldn't find a job. I walked around 3 different job centres every day for 3 months, and that was about a 10-mile round trip before I finally stumbled across a van sales job and thought, I can do that. And I applied for it and had the interview at 4:00 and started the next day.
Wow. And you stayed up there?
For 3 years. I became a van salesman up there for 3 years, and then went to Bristol as a trainee manager. Then I got my own depot in Bodmin in Cornwall. Then I moved up to Cardiff, then across to Sevenoaks in Kent, and then back to Bristol.
Right.
Became National Operations Manager after 14 years.
Wow. And did you miss the military and the police at this point, or were you missing?
Oh, yes. Yeah. I miss the military now. If I could go back, if there was a war now, I'd sign up. But being nearly 69, they probably wouldn't want me. But as long as they put a GPMG on my wheelchair, I'll be fine.
That's really interesting because, and I ask people, if you could have a word with yourself now, what would you be saying to a young Paul Rees in 1980, 81? What would you be saying to him?
Stay in the police.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the police was good for me. But you've travelled, you've lived in South Africa and Greece. How did that come about?
I left BFP, the company I worked for in the bakery trade, because I was offered a job as a sales manager in Johannesburg on a 2-year contract. And I thought, why not? I was single by then. I thought, I'll go for it. So I went over there. I did my 2 years and I loved it. It was a great place, fantastic. I applied for immigration to stay and carry on the job. But they told me, no, we've got enough white people. We're trying to get rid of them. So you have to go home. So I came back to the UK with £320 in my pocket, nowhere to live, no job, no prospects. I wrote on pieces of paper everywhere I thought I'd like to live, and I folded them up, and I got a waitress to pick out one, and she picked out Coventry. So I went back, booked into a B&B, went to the job centre next day, got a job as a truck driver, and then found somewhere to rent. And then after that, I lasted there 6 weeks before I got a job as a sales manager for a non-destructive testing company in Coventry. I did that for 2 years. During that 2 years, I'd gone out on holiday to Greece twice every year, and I loved the place. It was amazing. And they rang me up and said, come and live out here and run the restaurant for us. By that time, I was married with the son, my other son, Daniel. And we decided, yeah, we'll go for it. So we packed up, sold up, and moved out there.
Wow. Good time had by all.
Oh, yes. The summers were amazing. We had snow on Christmas Day, which was absolutely amazing. And New Year, it went down to -12 with 3 foot of snow.
I never thought they had that much snow.
They said they hadn't had snow for 20 years before I got there, so they blamed me for it. You bloody British, you bring this weather over here, take it back.
So you've now returned back to the UK.
Yeah.
When did you have your first heart attack?
6 years ago.
Wow.
Up here in Carnarvon. I woke up in the morning thinking I must have slept funny on my arm because it was killing me. And the house I rented, I had my little workstation by the front door. And it was a lovely day, so I opened the front door and the pain was still bad. So I took a couple of paracetamol. And then I started feeling the pains in my chest. And a butcher who was walking past saw that I was in pain and called for an ambulance. And they whisked me off to hospital and said, yeah, you've had a heart attack. I said, okay, fine, great. And I came out next day and I said, anything going in there, operate? No, you'll be fine. And then a year later, I had another one. And then a third. And I was told by the cardiologist that if I had a fourth one, I wouldn't survive it. Last February, I had my fourth one and came out and went, yes, survived it.
Wow. Have they put stents in or what's the...
They're going to put stents in, but they said they wouldn't do it at the time because my heart was okay. I've got what's called a GTN spray. If I get the pains, I have to spray that into my mouth.
Right.
And that opens the heart valves up.
So for anyone listening, the symptoms are you get a pain in your left-hand side.
Your left arm and then the chest. And last year I blacked out twice. Hence why DVLA revoked my driving license.
Oh, no.
They were worried about me blacking out. I can get it back in September as long as I haven't had any more blackouts.
Right.
So, fingers crossed.
That's hard, though, isn't it? Is that when your license is gone, that's a part of your lifeline, isn't it?
51 years of driving, over 1 million miles in 11 different countries, and then all of a sudden you can't do it.
Yeah, that
really hit me hard.
Yeah, I can imagine. But you're an author now, sir.
I am. My first effort at writing was for Reader's Digest. Crikey, when was that? 10 years ago. I sent off a story which they published and gave me £100. And I thought, hey, this is good.
Wow.
Cope with that. So then I started writing for SEN magazine, Special Educational Needs magazine. And then I wrote, when we moved up here, I knew I had a story. So I wrote it and I gave it to a friend of mine. I said, just run through it and see what you think. And he said, get it published. It's great. But I sent it off to various literary editors and I had a nice stack of rejection letters. And someone said, publish it yourself. So after a lot of trial and error, I managed to get it published. And I was gobsmacked that it sold 250 copies in the first 2 weeks. I just didn't think it would take off like that.
How easy is it to get a book published then, as a self-published?
Well, you go on Amazon, you go on Kindle Direct Publishing, you upload your manuscript, you design your own cover, you press publish, and then you go out and market it.
As simple as that?
Yeah. The process is not that simple, because uploading your cover, you can have them made for you, or you can design your own. I designed all my own apart from one. And you've got to get it right, the bleed over of the page and everything. The manuscript's got to be perfectly formatted. It's got to have equal sides. And it's a bit of a faff the first time you do it. Then once you've done it twice, it becomes easier, and you just set the formatting on your computer to the same, and then you're up and running.
And edits, I mean, somebody proofread it for you? Or
Yeah, I've had people proofread. I even paid a guy to proofread my book, £50, got it published, and then people were saying to me, have you had that proofread? That is horrendous. So I've taken it off, and I've gone through it myself. I write, I edit, I proofread probably 10 to 20 times with every book.
Wow.
And you still miss something.
Yeah, of course.
Like in my latest book, Going Dark, I spelled dyed, as in dyed my hair, as D-I-E-D.
Right. And
I've now changed it. So that's the only spelling mistake in that book. Thank goodness.
Yeah, and it happens on a regular basis, and I think sometimes I become word blind and put the wrong word in, or the comma in the wrong place, or apostrophes missing, or something like that. And I'm not particularly good with the grammar element.
Things like commas and apostrophes, and I say no, it doesn't matter. If it doesn't detract from the story, why criticise it?
Yeah.
But spelling mistakes is a bugbear of mine. I hate myself for making spelling mistakes.
Yeah. Or missing a word. I miss whole words out in passages sometimes. And that's another bugbear of mine. But then I've got a lovely friend who reads and listens to everything that I do, and he's very quick to publicly pick me up. But
of course.
So if I want to get hold of your books, and I'm going to put all the links into your podcast when this comes out in a couple of weeks, but if I want your books, I can just search through Paul Rees and through Amazon.
Yeah. There's another Paul Rees who writes a lot about musicians and musical instruments. He's much more prolific than I am.
Right.
But if you take one book, let's say Going Dark by Paul Rees, and then it'll bring you to a link where you can see all the other books.
Oh, I see. Oh, yeah, no, that makes sense. And you must enjoy that. It's an immersive process, isn't it, when you're writing?
Yeah. Well, when I wrote Hannah, I Am the Storm, that was inspired by a young homeless girl that my son and I met 6 years ago in Manchester. Her name was Hannah, and she told us her story. And I said to Dan, we helped her out. And I said to Daniel, there's a story there, but not the story she's given me. So I've turned this girl from a homeless waif into a clever, trained, young, crime-fighting woman. And when I wrote that, it took me 3 weeks, because I stayed up till 4 o'clock in the morning. Then I'd get up at 7 and carry on with it.
Wow.
I was just so absorbed by it.
Does she know that you've written this book?
No, we've tried to get hold of her many times. We've gone back to Manchester, and we've been in touch with Centrepoint and the police, and she's just vanished, which is a great shame. I've got a photograph of her, and I've shown them the photograph, but they said no, she's nowhere around. I'd love her to have a copy of the book and 50% of the royalties, because she inspired me.
Well, if you let me have a copy of the picture, if you've got it, and I'll put it on this podcast, because like you say, it's important to get it out there.
Yeah, just bear with. I don't know if you can see.
Oh yeah, cool. That would be brilliant. Yeah, if you let me have a copy of that'd be superb.
My son took that while I was talking to her, and I said to her, "Can we help you? Have you eaten?" And she said, "No." So she was outside a Spar shop. So I left Daniel outside and went in, came out with a couple of carry bags full of food, and I noticed she smoked, so I bought a couple of packs of cigarettes as well. And we chatted, and as I was chatting to her, Daniel took the photograph. So yeah, I'll send that to you because I'd like her to benefit from it.
I mean, it's interesting because we are all, one drink away from becoming alcoholics. We're all one mortgage mispayment from being homeless, and it is sometimes those people that need the greatest amount of help are the people that are right in front of us.
Yeah.
So, what does the future look like for Paul Rees?
Well, I'll be 69 soon. I really should start slowing down, but my book Going Dark, I published it and I've been impressed. It's achieved the top 1% of Amazon psychological thrillers.
Brilliant.
Which was my best result yet. But when I published it, I realized I could have carried on going with that story. So I'm now working on that. I'm working on a dystopian novel about the pandemic. And it involves the vaccine, COVID, and immigration. I won't say any more. And I've got a third one, which is a detective thriller, I hope.
Oh, brilliant. So the days are going to be full for you.
And the nights, yes. Yeah.
Well, it's been absolutely fantastic talking to you today. Thank you.
And you too.
So much for your time. Me. No, it's been good, and I'll put all your links into the body of the podcast brief, and I look forward to catching up with you. Please keep in touch. It'd be nice to know how things go. And but before we go, is there anything you'd like to add, alter, or correct from today?
Crikey, it sounds like a police statement, that. No.
There you go. That sounds like everybody else that I ever interviewed in a police statement. So that's...
as long as I'm not under caution, we'll be all right.
Indeed. Well, and that's, the police element runs through everything that we do, police and military, so it's really cool. But thank you so much for your time today, sir, and I wish you well
thank you for inviting me.
For the future.